John Taylor Gatto, who wrote The Underground History of American Education. And he said, there is many ways to educate as there are fingerprints. That's the glory of homeschooling. You can match it to where you live and your circumstances. You just do what works for your family.
All right, everybody, here we are back, the Zan Tyler podcast, and it's not just me, don't worry. I'm Caleb, but Zan, are you here?
I'm here.
Zan's here, everybody. We're still here. It's almost 4th of July. If you're not watching the video, Zan is looking very festive. That's not the right word. Patriotic.
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 That's right. I got on my 4th of July earrings, and
Exactly.
I wear them when I speak on freedom. I always wear red, white, and blue when I speak on freedom.
So you wear a lot of red, white, and blue because that's kind of your thesis.
Yes, this is true. This is true.
Of the last several years. Well, on that note, make sure you subscribe to YouTube. Share this with everybody. Share it with the homeschool naysayers. Summer, you know what I've noticed, Dan, right around now is when people, because homeschooling's grown so much, we've talked, 2.5% pre-2020, and now it's 10 to 13 to 15%. More and more people right now, July, August, this is when they're starting to look around and think, do I really want to send them back to school? So go share it. Share this with those types of people. We got some fun clips, Zan. Speaking of summer, are you ready for the first clip?
I'm ready for the first clip.
Mama, Jackson said he's on summer break. I want to be on summer break.
Do you remember when Jackson said he goes to real school to prepare for the real world?
Yeah.
Well, tell Jackson there's no summer break in the real world. Go play.
Okay.
That's true. Oh my gosh. Did you ever get a summer break, Zan? When did it hit you? And as you moved out of high school to college to the real world, that summer break was something we had fabricated, and one day.
I think it was when we got married, I had graduated from Furman. Joe had transferred to USC, and he still had another year left. And so we had a baby the day before he graduated from USC, and then he went to work. And so I'm thinking, okay, I just need to hang in there till December when you practically get the whole month off. And Joe said, yeah, I think I get 3 days off as the newbie in a corporation.
I know, it's such a shock.
Oh, I thought this is terrible. And I remember when my oldest son graduated from college, and he had transferred his junior year, so he lost a year, so it was like 5.5 years in all. And we get to Christmas the first year he's graduated, and he called me and he said, tell me why I was in such a hurry to graduate from college.
I know, right?
Yes.
These are some good comments. We have, as a former homeschooler, we had a break, but we decided to use it during spring so we could spend all of our break outside and resume school again in summer when it was so hot and we didn't want to be outside. 10 out of 10 would recommend. Which I'll wait a few more. Maybe in the US there are no summer breaks. Oh, this always comes in with the Europeans. But as a European, I'm going to be enjoying my 4 weeks off of paid vacation time during the summer, which Europeans can greatly enjoy because their mass revenue comes from tourism. And guess who visits Europe and spends all their tourist dollars?
That's right.
The Americans who are still working out through the summer.
Yes, this is true.
I hear that, we don't have to go into it, but I hear that Europe argument frequently. And when I was in Paris, it was something like 85% of the revenue was international tourism. I was like, that means it's our money. Like, you're welcome. Anyway, I just like the freedom of it. I like the fact that you the world is your classroom. You make it. You get to teach your kids how this is. I think sometimes there's a little bit of a stigma, maybe, that homeschoolers are hardcore and we're still schooling all the way through summer. But then I think it's important to remember that we throw around the word school a lot. And so we've actually changed the verbiage in our house. We call it academics because we do believe, well, like, everything is school. Like, we're trying to teach you how to, we're trying to teach you how to be a leader, Grace. And we're trying to teach you how to be kind to your little sister and make breakfast. And then also water the, life is school. So what we've switched our verbiage to, okay, if you're going to sit down with some BJU Press books, that's academics. Like, we'll call that academics. So And yes, we'll take some break from academics for a couple weeks in the summer, but you never stop learning.
That's exactly right. I think that's the main thing to point out. And just about the summer break thing, they took their break in spring.
Oh yeah.
So we live in the South, and the South gets really hot and humid, but it never kept us from going outside, even when there was no air conditioning back in the day, you know. But when I visited my friend Nancy in Arizona in
Oh gosh.
July, and it was like 115 plus every day. I don't care if they say it's dry heat. I mean, that was you couldn't go outside heat.
Right.
And so I
Yes.
understand for the first time why people would really switch to the spring for their break when they can be outside. That's the glory of homeschooling. It you can match it to where you live and your circumstances, and you can we talked about it in our last session together. You can do the 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off. You just do what works for your family. I read a quote the other day. I wish I could remember who it was. Oh, it was John Taylor Gatto who wrote The Underground History of American Education. And he said, there is many ways to educate as there are fingerprints.
Oh, that's a great quote.
Isn't that a great
That could be
quote? I
the
love that. Yeah.
There is a heavy concentration of educators trying to make sure that our kids know about victims, victims, victims. You're a victim, you're a victim. How sad for you, you are oppressed. However, they are abandoning teaching about the heroes, the American heroes. Our kids still need to learn about American heroes. And whenever I look at tragic events like September 11th and like Pearl Harbor, what better way to teach about our American heroes and how Americans bonded together after those horrific attacks to really try and right the wrong and try and do good and try and move forward and rebuild.
Absolutely. And the thing is that when you divide groups and divide an entire country into groups of oppressor and oppressed, you forget and you lose the fact that many of the people that fought for the United States, they understood that, yeah, of course, this country is not perfect, but they fought for the country.
Yeah.
They fought for it. And they understood the reality of an imperfect country, but they also knew they had perspective and said this is an evil, foreign attack on our country, and they could see that and know that as imperfect as this country is, it's worth fighting for.
This country, as imperfect as it is worth fighting for.
Rick Green, Joe and Rick, my husband Joe and Rick were talking one day, and I can't remember who said it, but he said the mark of a good country are people trying to get into it or are they trying to leave it?
Right. It's
Eh,
it's like restaurants.
yes. And so I just, boy, on the 4th of July, I'm all over this. Both of our dads, mine and Joe's dads, were World War II veterans. Joe's dad died at 100 last year and was honored at Fort Jackson Army Base here by several thousand people for his service in World War II. And we do need heroes, and we need to be teaching kids to love our country. And just like every individual on the face of the earth, our country has had flaws. But the principles of freedom upon which we're built is worth fighting for and is worth cherishing our freedom. People around the world would love to have the freedom we have. Reminds me of a couple of things, Caleb. When Joe and I spoke in Japan the first time, I think it was '06, at a couple of homeschooling conferences over there to Japanese nationals, not to expats. So it's pretty amazing. We had dinner in this man's home. It was a restaurant, but it was on the bottom floor of his home. We all sat around a table, cross-legged on the floor, and they were doing a documentary on World War II. So we had a translator. And one of the stories he told that I'll never forget, my dad was actually on a ship watching the Emperor of Japan sign the treaty. He was in the
Wow.
harbor and he got to see the emperor sign the treaty and surrender. It's a pretty amazing story. And they took on the first POWs on their ship. But this man talked about how traditionally the Japanese fought to the death. And so when they understood that the emperor had surrendered, they all went into the hills. They went into the mountains and hid in the caves in the mountains. And so the next morning, they said they woke up to all this banging and noise, and they thought it was probably the American troops coming to kill them. And they sent out spies, and it was the American troops rebuilding their roads. And they said they went and they wept at the soldiers' feet and thanked them. And at every
Because
time,
these weren't when you said the Japanese, these were like citizens, like civilians
yes,
that ran to
yes,
the hills, not
yes,
not
yes,
Japanese soldiers.
yes, yes.
Wow.
And so it's really a remarkable story. Both times Joe and I have been to Japan, they love the United States and what we did for them after the war to rebuild their country. And it really is amazing. Joe and I have had a couple of conversations that really point to the importance of teaching our children the principles upon which we were founded as a nation, Christian principles, principles of freedom. So one was when we were speaking in historic colonial Williamsburg. And it's one of my favorite places in the world to be. Joe went to buy us tickets. He came back at sometimes you could stand in line for over an hour to get tickets. He was back in about 20 minutes. And I asked him why he was back so soon. And he said, well, it was really crickets over there. And this was like April. And he said he talked to one of the docents and he said their attendance had been down by like 30% since American schools had quit teaching the principles of liberty upon which this country was founded.
Oh, yeah.
And we've had trouble. Not this year, recruiting is up for the first time in our armed services, but for several years, many years, we had this downward slope where we couldn't get enough recruits in all four branches of service. And so, I think when you have a school system that's teaching the children not to love their country, well, who's going to join the armed services and sacrifice their lives to serve
Right.
this country?
Well, and
And
I'm 37, so when I was recruited hard, and this is statistically true across the country, you get recruited very, very hard if your town is like less than 10,000 people, because the more rural you are, a Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Army, they set up shop. They basically live on your campus. Like our high school campus had massive, because it was tiny little town, and that's really where, if you look it up, like that's the sweet spot for recruitment is rural America. But what was interesting is this was late 2007, 2006, 2008, that time. The tactic was never for America, ever. The tactic every time in these recruiters, and like I would get the calls and, could talk to your parent, the whole thing, all of it was, we'll pay for your college, we'll take care of you this, you can start at this salary. Like the concept of serving didn't even come up, like ever, in these recruitment tactics, which I thought about a little bit then because I was 17. And I remember getting called from a Marine recruitment officer, and I didn't like yell at him or anything, but I did ask him on the phone call. I'll actually remember this. I was doing landscaping. I got a call and I said, and he just launched right into a spiel. And the whole thing was about, hey, you only have to serve 4 years. We're at a low time. It'll be easy. X amount of money, but everything's taken care of. So it's just cash in the bank. Here's how we'll take care of your college. And I asked him, I said, can I ask you, like, why should I be a Marine? Like, what's the point? Like, what am I fighting for? Or am I fighting? And you could just tell like he was going off the script, and nowhere in there was about the pride, the healthy version of pride and heroism in defending and protecting and working for your country. Like it didn't even show up in his
right,
script.
right, I can see that.
So it's interesting, and from what you're saying now, it seems like we're actually coming out on the other side, and it seems to be now a little
Yes,
healthier
yes,
than it
I think
was
so too.
the past 20
Recruiting
years.
is actually up, and I think that's amazing. That's a good sign for us and for our country.
That is good. There's a few comments here. The education system in America fails to teach students most things of importance. That's something that a lot of people are complaining about lately. It's indoctrination, not education. That is another thing a lot of people say. The entire American education system needs to be dismantled and remade, which is another argument that gets brought up frequently. But speaking of America and what it means, especially in 4th of July, on the other side, we do have some wins. And there's a recent win at the Supreme Court. And this was not a state Supreme Court. This was the federal Supreme Court. Why don't you tell us a little bit what just happened? What was at stake? The key players. Tell us the story, Zan. What's
Uh,
going on at the Supreme Court?
Okay. In the celebration of freedom, I know it's a little bit past the July 4th date, but I think we all need to celebrate freedom. As a matter of fact, we can talk about this later, Caleb. I really encourage parents to have a 3 day, a 3 minute freedom challenge where you
Really? What's
address
that?
where you address with your children some aspect of freedom depending on
Hmm.
their ages. And it can be a number of things. Like, I timed how long it took me to read the Declaration of Independence. So sometimes I'll just sit at the table with Joe and I'll read the Declaration of Independence out loud. And it's amazing how much you think you know the Declaration says until you stop and read through it. And you
Right.
can do this with children, I would say 6 and up. You just read it at the table. You don't have to know every word, but you can explain concepts so that this is one of our founding documents, this in the Constitution. And so we need to know what our founding fathers were fighting for. It wasn't flippant. They took it seriously. They knew it was would cost a lot of their fortunes and loss of lives and everything else. That's pretty amazing. Or just spend time praying for persecuted Christians in other countries who would love the freedom we have. Or if it's around elections, acquaint your children with what elections are. Take them to vote with you. But every day you can take 3 minutes and figure out something to say about freedom. And this also challenges you as a parent to think about freedom and think about why is it, talk about different quotes or different heroes, as the lady in the clip was saying. We all need heroes. George Washington Carver is a particular historical hero of mine. And so I can spend 3 minutes just telling my grandkids, let me tell you what this man did and what he meant to our country. There are all kinds of things we can do. What is freedom? Why do we love freedom in this country? What does it mean? How do we lose our freedom? Why is it so important to have the right to vote? You can look at headlines that you're getting through your feeds, or if you still take a newspaper or watch the nightly news or local news. But at the core of everything we are as Americans is our freedom to live like we feel called to live, of course, within the
Hmm.
context of
No, I mean,
morality.
amen. I'm in pre-production for a project that one day we'll tell everyone about, and so I've been reading a lot about this, and it's interesting how much freedom we take for granted. It's not just taking for granted too; it's also, you know what I'm going to call it, assumption freedom. There is assumption freedom that we think, oh, this is how the world works because we live here. It's not. For an example, in France, which is a beautiful country with subpar food but really good at eclairs, if you go over there, that was my experience. But if you go over there, I dare you to open up your Bible and talk to someone about it because they can arrest you on the spot in any public space in France. If you have a job in France, try talking or inviting someone to church and see how quickly you're fired and then also written up by the court of law. Because France does not have freedom of religion. You can't just, you and I, Zan, right now, you're in Columbia, I'm in Colorado Springs. Either of us could grab a Bible right now and meet up with anyone we wanted in a park, coffee shop, and talk openly. We could pray, which in these two areas, by the way, South Carolina and Colorado Springs, you actually do see quite frequently people
Yes,
pray,
yes,
people praying
yes,
together.
right. Hmm.
Like I was just thinking as you were saying a 3 minute challenge, like those little things are just assumed and taken for granted. Like so much of the world, you can't even say Jesus, let alone have a Bible out in public. In France, in the schools in France, you can't have anything that looks like a cross. You can't wear a cross necklace. You definitely cannot bring a Bible on school grounds. I mean, we are so blessed. So, as the forces are coming against us, Ann, I think you got some news for us about a win.
Yes, we do. So we need to celebrate our victories. And this
Yes.
year, and I've mentioned this, but it's worth mentioning again, is the 100th anniversary of Pierce versus the Society of Sisters, which is a Supreme Court decision they gave us that says the child is not the mere creature of the state. And I think that's really important for us to remember, because in many communist countries, socialist countries, or especially communist countries, children are the mere creature of the state. And so then we had another Supreme Court case in 1979, Parham versus JR. And there are several things. I know it's So take this as your 3-minute challenge for freedom for today. So our jurisprudence, the Supreme Court says, historically has reflected Western civilization concepts of the family as a unit with broad parental authority over minor children. Our cases have consistently followed that course. Our constitutional system long ago rejected any notion that a child is the mere creature of the state, and on the contrary, asserted that parents have the right, coupled with the high duty, to recognize and prepare their children for additional obligations. Now, this was added: the statist notion that governmental power should supersede parental power in all cases because some parents abuse and neglect children is repugnant to American tradition. They're not saying here they're in favor of child abuse or truancy or anything else. They are saying there's presumptive innocence when it comes to parents, that we will do the right thing. Whereas a lot of the bills been talked about lately on this podcast presume that the parent is guilty going into it. The case in
Right.
New Jersey, where they want to have a well check for every
Yep.
homeschool student. Well, that's presumptive guilt. And so we
Right, which
need to.
is the antithesis of the concept of due process. Back again to what we just said a few minutes ago, assumptive freedom. Due process is unique to us,
That's right,
which
and
is so
presuming
important.
innocence until
Is
proven guilt. Yes.
that is our baseline. And look, there's been very famous court cases that let's not even bring them up, where everyone watching is like, of course this person's guilty. Like, oh gosh, our system, it's like, no, no, no. You have to understand how precious this system is, because the
Yes.
moment you reverse it, like, which doesn't take much to do that, right? But you reverse it, all of these bills that you're talking about, we would have been in more position to lose because of the base. But if our baseline is due process, that that is how we win. And it's just fascinating that people are just not educated on that. They need to be listening to your podcast
So
is what needs
so
to happen.
so there was a Supreme Court just recently. Supreme Court hands win to parents in dispute over pro LGBT books, What You Need to Know. Now, this is interesting because I think it was in a school district in Maryland. They there was an LGBT curriculum that was adopted. And initially, the school board or the school officials told parents they could opt their children out of it. Well, then it happened the next year, they could not opt their children out. And so several Catholic, Muslim, and Eastern Orthodox families sued. And so they lost at the lower court levels, but then it went to the Supreme Court level. I'm not going to take a long time on this, but here is the good news from this. I want to read this from Judge Alito, who was writing, it was a 6-3 decision, who was writing for the majority, said, we as the Supreme Court reject this chilling vision of the power of the state to strip away the critical right of parents to guide the religious development of their children. Powerful. You know what? I'm going to read this again. We reject this chilling vision of the power of the state to strip away the critical right of parents to guide the religious development of their children. This comes on the 100th anniversary of Pierce versus the Society of Sisters. And I just want to say, hear, 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 hear.
I
Now,
love it. Yes,
so
absolutely.
listen to what the opponents on the court said.
Mm.
Today's ruling threatens the very essence of public education and says that it gives parents too much power over educators via the free exercise clause of the First Amendment.
I almost feel like you could say that with a different attitude, and it would be with something that you and I would say. You know what I mean? You could almost take what they said word for word, be like, "Thank God that this gives the parents the rights over
Yes,
an
yes,
education system."
yes, yes.
Isn't that it's and we can move on, but it's just fascinating to me. Like, if you say something that's not true or lie loud enough, frequently enough, it becomes considered
Right, right. And I
truth.
think
So
I
that's
don't
yeah.
know if we need to attribute this. This was from an article I just found on the Epic Times. And but I love, and then I love where it talked about how it would be a nightmare for the public school system to have to implement this opt-out system. And that's what they signed up for. In New Jersey, if they think they have time to do a well check on every homeschool child, they have time to run an opt-out decision. Or maybe they should check more with the parents in their district before they adopt different curriculum.
Ask any parent or ask any public school teacher what is the hardest part of your job, and they will all, coast to coast, say the exact same answer, and it's one word.
Parents.
The parents.
So
I said 2 words.
well,
My bad.
That's all right.
I can't
That's
get it
all
right.
We give you a little grace. This podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com.
If you want to raise successful kids, especially boys, you have one job: love his mom.
That's so sick.
I mean, people often ask, what should I teach my kids? It doesn't matter what you tell them. All that matters is what you do. So the number one predictor, for example, of kids growing up and practicing a religion is whether their father practices a religion. There's like a 40 percentage point difference in the father and the mother practicing on the predictive capacity on how the kids are going to grow up and behave. I mean, when I was a little kid, I thought my dad could lift the corner of the house. My dad was a math professor. He could not.
Now I realize he was a nerd. Yeah.
Now that I'm a nerd, I recognize that. And my dad was a very proud guy, but he was on his knees on Sunday. And that had a big impact on a little dude. There's something bigger than my dad. And I saw it. That's really important in every part of life. If you want to teach virtue, practice virtue. Be the person you want your kids to actually turn into, and they will become that.
Be the kids you actually want your kids to turn into. But man, that hit me. I was like, my kids see more than anything else, not what I tell them. It's what I show them, and it's going to church, but it is by and large in heaps, two shoulders above. It's how I speak to my wife.
Oh,
That's what they see.
yes, that when he started out, husbands love your wives. I just cannot even express how true that is. And Joe and I have been married for well over 40 years. And I will tell you, I think the biggest gift he ever gave our kids was that, because it provides so much stability in the home. Not that either one of us are perfect or did everything right by any means, but love covers the multitude of sin. And love is a powerful, powerful force. Husband love your wives. Biggest gift my husband gave me. The second thing, Caleb, and I know Steph sees this in you all the time too, is really, I think, is a powerful dad who is a servant leader. And, the Bible says so much about that. There were 1,000 ways my husband laid down our lives for his kids and for us. And he would come in from work, and he might have been gone for 3 days, or he may have been worked late. He never came in expecting to sit down with his newspaper and the television. He came in willing to finish up supper or vacuum or pick up the hurting child or cure the fight or whatever. And dads are so important. Okay, you are the dad. I need to let you speak to this, but I just had to give a shout out to Joe,
To be honest, I can't. I mean, if anyone's scrolling this reel or this clip or this short or listening, I mean, it's the kind of thing that I saw his opening. Just, you have one job. Love mom. Love their mom. Like, I was like, all right, I'm done. Just turn off the devices for the week. Like, there was so much conviction in that, because I think I'm doing it right. But then the moment you hear someone just say it out, it's just, how you just know all these truths in your head, Zan, but occasionally, that's why we still go to church. Like, look, I don't want to be prideful and say, I've heard every sermon under the sun, but most of the sermons have already been preached. And yet, but yet we still go to church, and it's like, you could be something you've heard a million times. And like, sometimes you just need someone to look you in the eyes as a man and say, hey, remember, you need to love your wife. And it seems so obvious, but when you hear it out loud, it just, I don't know. I don't want to like get all choked up and start crying, but it really convicted me. Like, it just, it matters so much more than getting things done or accomplishing something or making sure the vacation went a certain way or making sure that you have auto pay on the mortgage so you don't get a fee, which is a thing I know about now. The you just, gosh, they just see how you treat their mom. And it's so important. And like, you could homeschool till the dogs come home or whatever that phrase is. And it doesn't matter, like, if they don't see their dad loving their mom, because that's so important. And so that's all I have to say about that, Zan. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit here crying and Joe's going to have to take over.
No, amen, amen. And I just love what he said about his dad was a proud dad and he was on his knees. You know, you model Christianity in so many ways. I mean, our words matter. We have to speak it, but
Right.
the
They do.
that model coming from the dad, especially somewhere in the United States, we picked up this notion. Joe talks about this where we speak, where the wife is responsible for the spiritual growth in the home and for the relationships in the home. And, he always says, "Nope," it's the dad. The dad needs to take the responsibility for the relationships in the home. And about I just have to tell you this, Joe, because Joe and I speak on marriage together, and he always says, "The grass isn't greener on the other side, the grass is greener where you
Where
water
you
it."
water it.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Well, transitioning out of that, there's been also some more stuff happening in the homeschool space. This article comes from the HSLDA. Not that we're sponsored by them, but if you're not a member, recommend it, or at least get in touch with them, see how they can help you in your homeschool journey. The Homeschool Legal Defense Association, who has been very busy this year. we
Absolutely.
we got the Worldview Watershed: How Small Policy Shifts Shape Homeschool Freedom.
Okay. I just think this is important because I really view this as a freedom episode. It's the 4th of July. We celebrate our country. We've celebrated parental rights, especially the last 100 years. And now we have this reaffirming decision from the United States Supreme Court. But it doesn't mean that Caleb and I were just talking about this. Freedom isn't free. Freedom involves our intentional attention. And we often feel like little regulations are okay.
Right,
But
right,
do
yes.
you know what I'm saying? But it's a slippery slope. So you can find this article. It's called Worldview Watershed House, just as Caleb said, How Small Policy Shifts Shape Homeschool Freedom on the HSLDA website, hslda.org, and put the name of the title in there. You can read it. And it's interesting because they're also talking about really this whole this area of presumptive guilt. And he just talks about how there have been Jim Mason is the president of HSLDA and a great advocate for freedom and a great author. And he talked about what happened in Virginia this year, how they tried to opponents tried to get rid of religious freedom. In Illinois, how, quote, reasonable regulations were introduced. And it was really the uprising of the Black community in Chicago that killed this bill. In many ways, it was the work of my friend Kirk Smith, who is the president of the Illinois Christian Home Educators Association, and I know that the efforts of the Black community, homeschooling community, was huge too. But always, we are going to see, I think, from now on, this push to have homeschooling more regulated because it seems innocuous but important. I will tell you, most regulations equal misery. And there have been a whole host of regulations that we fought in South Carolina. I mean, we fought um, lawsuits and laws that have really all but declared homeschooling illegal. We fought rules and regulations like 4.5 hour days. We fought really important battles like the State Department of Education here wanting to require to have homeschooling parents have a college degree and only use state approved text. And so we have all these things where the state, through either through the State Department of Education or through some of the citizens, want to come in and regulate homeschooling. And sometimes we think, oh, we need to be reasonable about this regulation. But let me tell you, as we rehearsed in all those decisions earlier, the Supreme Court has affirmed the power of parents to make the best decision for their children. And so we don't need these regulations that kill the heart of homeschooling, even though they sound reasonable. Let me just read you one or two quotes. This is what Jim says. Our belief, our worldview, if you will, leads us to conclude that a system where parents have wide latitude in raising their children, while not perfect, is far better for many more children than a system where the raising of children is highly regulated, restricted, and in some cases dictated by the state. And then he says our ideological opponents disagree. They are suspicious of parents. And I think that is the heart of it. Instead of having confidence in parents, they are suspicious of parents. And so we need to be suspicious of any regulation, no matter how minuscule it seems, because it's that little drip, drip, drip that can lead to an avalanche of regulation that basically kills homeschool freedom. So I just want to encourage you once again to make sure you know what your state organization is, how you can be involved with them. It's the state homeschool orgs that are always on the front line battling freedom. Get this article, keep up to date with the articles in the court report by hslda.org on hslda.org. And just remember that all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Good men, women, and children to do nothing.
He says, when you see new regulations, always ask which watershed they flow toward, because there's not an option to not flow to one.
Mhm.
So is it either more freedom or is it more state control? Because there is no in between.
Amen. So, what do you think, Caleb, as a new homeschooling dad? I mean, basically, you're not really a new homeschooling dad anymore, but
Oh,
new
it
into the
still feels like it. No, I think being in the culture and community, there's a few things I've seen in Christendom in the United States, and there's something called the Tyler cycle, and the Tyler cycle begins with bondage, and then bondage leads to religious freedom. Because you're in bondage, you're looking for hope, which is why the two fastest growing churches in the world are China and Iran. And guess what? They're growing in body, not building, which is something that America could learn from. So you go from bondage to uh, religious pursuit, which usually goes to Christianity. And then that leads to bondage. It leads to spiritual faith, which will, once you have spiritual faith, it moves itself to great courage. Well, great courage will move to liberty, which creates abundance, because if you have liberty, you now have the freedom, and you have felt what bondage felt like. So it goes from liberty to abundance. Here's the problem with abundance. Abundance often leads to selfishness, and it's usually not the same generation. It's usually the next generation that is benefiting from the abundance of the courage. So that means selfishness leads to apathy. And once you're completely apathetic and courage is tanked, the next level is dependence, which is state control. And once you're in full state control, the next step is, surprise, surprise, back to bondage. And so, and now as a Christian, do I believe in this? No. I believe that the power of God is sovereign, and everything has been moving in his purview. I think God is the ultimate authority, and no one is stuck in this cycle. I think you can remove yourself from this cycle. I think if there wasn't all of these Christians out here in these state organizations and companies like BJU Press that care, that are actively writing down, printing, distributing biblical worldview, if that wasn't the case, then yes, this would be the cycle, and we're way past due to be back in bondage. I mean, really, like all these regulations you're talking about, they would have been passed with Horace Mann back in 1850, and it just would have kept going. But because we have had people of courage, I absolutely believe we are not stuck in this cycle. However, I think it's important for people to understand this cycle, and I do see in the homeschool community I see it there less, but by and large, I see apathy and dependence.
And complacency, yes, which is
Because
yeah.
apathy, complacency, it's what happens in the White House doesn't concern my house, right?
Mhm,
There's that whole concept. And so I think you and I have talked about it so much, and I've learned so much, and my wife and Stephanie has learned so much being around you and Joe and Michael Knott, and just all these people are Renton Raffman, people who care, that we've had to learn, there is never a time in history really where you get to sit down. There's just not. I mean, are we in 1776 right now? No, but we still, at every turn, those freedoms and liberties are actively, uh, and it sounds so dark to say, but they are actively in threat. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it. Maybe the better
No,
way to say
no,
it,
I
in
think no.
flux. It's delicate, is what I would say. It's not like the founding fathers were able to create this steel box, lock the liberty in it, and say, "Cool, liberty is now taken care of." No, it's basically open.
Right,
Liberty
well, like,
sits open.
this presumptive ban, like, 4 years ago that, Elizabeth oh, what's her f always I call her Elizabeth what's her face, I can't remember her last
Was
name.
it she Warren? Was that Elizabeth Warren?
Elizabeth Bartholet
Bartlett, that's
was a
right.
professor at Harvard Law, I believe, and she called for a presumptive ban on homeschooling.
Yep,
So, you see that we are always going to have enemies, a
exactly.
and we just need to know what the issues are and make that three-minute commitment to freedom every day.
Well, Zan, thank you for having me back. I love learning from you. I love giving my naive perspective as a new homeschool dad. So
Not true.
thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. It's always fun to do these, and I love having your perspective because
Oh, thank you.
as generations, we need to be working together on the same page with the same energy. So thank you for all you do.
And to the listener, subscribe. We're everywhere. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, follow on Facebook. If you got questions, you want something with us we should talk about, hop on to zantyler.com. But until next time, we'll see you later.
Bye.